Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Build Consulting webinar for February 2021 titled How to Build a Better Technology Roadmap in 2021. Today, I'll be introducing some key concepts to inform your tech strategy and roadmap, focusing primarily on areas that often get overlooked, but if attended to properly, will dramatically increase your chances of success in seeing a return on your technology investment. I'm definitely going to leave a lot of time at the end for any questions that you might have, and you'll also have access at the end of the presentation to my personal contact info for any follow-ups that you'd like to send my way. I'm happy to have email or a brief chat. Just a couple of quick housekeeping notes before we get started with today's presentation. Feel free to ask the questions using the available Q&A feature in Zoom. I'd appreciate that. Avoid multitasking. You may just miss the best part of the presentation, but if you do, recordings will be available after the fact and will be shared via email. My name is Peter Mirus. I'm a founding partner at Build Consulting. I have 20 years of experience serving nonprofit organizations, ranging in size from small and local to enterprise and global organizations and across a wide variety of industry categories and mission orientations. Over the past 7 years, I've worked exclusively with nonprofit organizations, working with about 100 clients total. And I have 3 primary areas of expertise: marketing, constituent relationship management, and information strategy. And a little bit about Build Consulting. We're invested in the nonprofit community. We work exclusively with nonprofits and have served over 1,000. We work strategically to help our clients make information technology and information systems decisions that support their mission. And we are collaborative on our approach. We empower our clients to make informed decisions on their own behalf. And these are just some examples of how we lead in the social goods sector through providing services. But all of our services are designed to help clients transform themselves to better serve constituents of all types, including funders, donors, program beneficiaries, staff, volunteers, and the general public. So I thought we'd just dive into a couple of fundamental things that should be in every technology roadmap. And I think the first thing is to make sure that the vision for the future of technology at your organization is aligned with your organizational strategy and vision. What you see on the screen here is an example of a vision of the future slide that we put in a roadmap for a client. And you can see it's very business centric. We really want to give them technology solutions, as it says here, that'll help staff treat member and funder relationships as organizational assets, not things that are siloed into individual parts of the organization. And the goal is that we want to drive new and expanding relationships. And the idea is that within those relationships, we'll work on engagement and we'll have service to constituent groups that's so strong that it elevates the entire brand of the organization and leads to greater opportunities for mission fulfillment. And then some specifics about the characteristics of what that vision includes. In this case, we're using our information strategy framework from Build Consulting, which I'll talk to you about in a minute, to organize it into 5 areas focused on leadership, development of operational capacities or resources, better business processes, data models, and a smaller, cleaner, for this organization's example, set of modern technology solutions that really support those business processes necessary to serving constituents at a high level. So you really want to make sure that your organizational strategy and your technology strategy are aligned with each other and they have a common vision. The next thing that you want to make sure to include is a case for change. And that case for change should be oriented towards what your organization ideally is going to solve as problems, and then what challenges or opportunities are going to be able to be addressed as well. So basically, what is the reason, whether it's the pain or the opportunity, that's going to make it a good idea for the organization to take this path, to go down this roadmap? And for this particular example that I'm showing on screen here, also from a client deliverable, we highlighted that technology adoption and effectiveness is low compared to their organizational peers. And there's a lot of pain and confusion regarding how business processes should be executed within the provided technology solutions. Some problems with process standardization, high level of complexity resulting from the number of solutions in use. I think this organization had about 40 to 50 staff members and had probably about 26 individual systems. So that's a lot of systems for an organization of that size. And it resulted in a lot of complexity, different things being done in different parts of the organization using different tools in different ways. And so that resulted in a lot of inefficiency and also the opportunity, the significant opportunities to better fulfill the mission. We believe that the client could significantly increase the quality of service it offers to constituents by trying to pursue that path. And then there's what we all think about when we think about a roadmap. What are the different paths or tracks that we're going down? What kind of projects that we need to pursue? This example on the screen here is from a client that was primarily focused on improving their ability to assess, report, and analyze on the financial performance of the organization across all of their programs. So this roadmap was more specifically focused on that. Other roadmaps would maybe involve the entire tech future for an organization. We think it's important when we're putting in roadmaps to identify quick wins. I think this is part and parcel of all or most roadmaps that Build puts together for our clients. What are those things that can be achieved in the short term that will help sustain organization participation and help to motivate people as we move towards some more of those longer term objectives? And then oftentimes there's some data governance or greater area of governance or accountability that needs to be established. It might be a data governance committee or a better approach from executive teams towards interacting with technology projects. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the future. And then in this case, they had priorities that were very closely aligned to that overall goal of getting a better and more streamlined financial picture of their performance. And that revolved around standardizing grant management and budgeting functions to make sure that they really had the processes in place to produce the data that they wanted to see, as well as funding allocation procedures, and then work on improvements to Intact, which was their current ERP system, and then finally implement a global financial and planning tool. So I just want to emphasize that you would probably want to have somewhere between 5 to 10 tracks. If you have too many more than that, or paths that you want to pursue in your strategy, whether it's a 1-year strategy or a 3-year strategy or a 5-year strategy, people start to get a little bit overwhelmed with too much information. So you really want to focus on those key organizational priority and risks and then create sort of tracks that align to that. And this is a visual of how you can identify specific projects that would take place within each of those tracks over a period of time. I'm not going to go into detail on what's on the screen here, but you want to make sure that you break them down so that each project seems well defined and approachable, and that they're in logical sequence. So if you just take a look down at the track number 2 there in red, we want to make sure that leadership alignment and change planning for the future financial data analysis is in place before you get into the process, start trying to redefine functions or processes, or really before you even start to implement a financial planning and analysis solution. So it's important that the projects be well defined and that they be sequenced, and that everybody understands what the definition is of the projects and how they're going to take place in order. Part of that is providing a good overview for whatever that initiative is that's being pursued, but it's also specifically defining the different projects in terms of key activities, expected outcomes, expected cost drivers, staff involvement or involvement level, and assumptions or notes. And so when you're outlining your project tracks and projects to create your roadmap, these are the kinds of details that you want to see at that high level. Every project that you desire to undertake that's in keeping with your vision, that's in keeping with your idea of change and why the change should be undertaken, should fit into a framework like this. So again, you should clearly identify the projects that you're going to pursue. You should define those projects specifically and prioritize and then sequence them over time. So this is just to give you an idea of how we think about what a roadmap should include. But there are a lot of things that go on behind the scenes or under the surface of the roadmap that are very important and really help create a foundational bedrock for the success of any strategy or implementation plan. And that's what's going to be the primary focus of what I talk about today. In Build Consulting, we say that tomorrow's best nonprofits will use technology to transform themselves and the world. But the problem is that more than 50% of nonprofit technology projects fail. And the reason for that is often because the technology moves forward, but the organization does not. We often show this formula to our clients, OO plus NT equals EOO, and it stands for old organization plus new technology equals expensive old organization. And we share this to highlight that transformation is critical to success in technology initiatives. There's no such thing as a technology change project that isn't also, to some degree, an organizational change project. And that's why when we think about creating technology strategies for organization, we think about what's on screen here, which I mentioned before. And you'll see that technology is all the way to the right, and that's deliberate. So, first you have leadership and governance, and then operations, process, data, and technology. So, when good leadership is engaged in setting the tone for any technology initiative, it typically goes more smoothly. Even seemingly small initiatives benefit when leadership participates. And so, when you're creating technology roadmaps, you really want to plan for executive sponsorship and executive participation. When we think about operations, we often think in terms of human resource capacity and especially internal capacity as it comes to project management and communications and thinking about the ability to deliver technology projects and communicate about them to the organization. And then in the process area, you want to make sure that you have the capacity internally and you plan for the design of effective processes. And that means more than just coming up with the best way to do something. It means developing sufficient documentation of the processes and, above all, setting the framework in place to execute the processes consistently in the new systems or the enhanced systems. It's one thing to agree to a standard process while you're in the conference room, and it's another for team members to actually consistently put it into practice at their desks. And then, in order to really make good use of the data that you have in your technology solutions, it must be consistently collected, it must be well organized, properly maintained, and used. So, organizations must do all of these things to have an effective information management environment. And then, technology can be viewed as the thing that naturally comes along once you've gotten everything upstream of that correct. It can often be viewed more as the simple answer to address problems with leadership, operations, processes, and data. But for the most part, technology is supportive of how organizations behave. New technology will, again, for the most part, not make up for what is lacking in the other areas. So the last two keys, as I said, particularly the technology part, are highly dependent on the first three. If you don't have good leadership, operations, and processes, success in the data and the technology management will be hampered. So when you think about technology roadmaps, make sure you think about holistically what the organization needs to have in place foundationally in order for any of those initiatives to be successful. And then make sure you plan for each of those things when you're actually putting the details of your roadmap together. And now I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail about what that means practically. So I'm going to talk briefly about 9 different keys to success in planning technology projects or roadmaps. And there are 2 regarding leadership, and then 6 related to operational capacity. And then I'm going to include with an extremely important key to success that encompasses the processes, data, and technology pieces. And after that, we should have a lot of time for questions if you have any. So, first, I want to talk a little bit about executive sponsors. Executive sponsors should be attached to any significant technology project inside of an organization, particularly for large, broadly impactful initiatives such as selecting and implementing an organization wide CRM. Executive sponsors should be visible with their participation and have regular communication. They should assist with the prioritization of resources towards the effort and provide guidance and support and ensure accountability. Um, so I mentioned a large scale CRM project, and that's one thing that Build often helps its clients with. And for a CRM platform like Salesforce or a broadly used CRM system, when you're completely replacing that in your organization, that's a significant change effort. It really should oftentimes be one of the top 2 to 3 strategic priorities for the organization during the duration of that project's being ongoing. So if it's that important, it should also have consistent and prioritized executive engagement. There's a lot of good information on our site, and we put a newsletter out recently about how uh, leaders in organizations, both technology leaders and others, maybe at the C level or at the director or manager level, can really get engaged, regardless of their level of experience with technology projects, to help ensure that their success. And then you want to make sure also at the leadership level that you identify the business benefits and performance measures. And this should be done as a collective effort, including all the necessary stakeholders. You basically want to say, what purposeful actions are we going to take during these technology projects that are in our roadmap to ensure that the benefits that we realize, that vision for the future, is actually going to be achieved and then sustained once the project ends? And you also want to develop clear structures and models for performance measurement, because otherwise, how do you know when you've been successful? An example of a business benefit would be to achieve a 10% increase in sustaining members for a fundraising organization or sustaining givers. Now, technology can help to support this, particularly if it predicts which donors will become sustainers and helps to automate the campaign outreach process. But technology alone won't address the issue. So there are purposeful actions that need to be taken during the implementation to make sure that this benefit is realized. And that might include effective training of staff on how to use the features and documenting the new business processes to make sure that they can be sustainably performed over time if there's turnover in staff, for example. So what I'm going to show on screen here are just some examples of ideas for performance measurement when you're putting a new system out there. So you can think of it, in this case, we had a Salesforce-based product that we branded Engage. We think about it as a product, basically a set of integrated tools supporting business processes. How well does the product support the business user's ability to execute those processes? You know, in the very essential measure, is the product successful? Does it do what it's supposed to do? And then also the product, the Salesforce platform as a service. Um, in this case, this Salesforce-based product was a community in which mentoring services were delivered, and we had a lot of complexity to it. So we had a set of training resources, support resources, human resources, and then knowledge base, et cetera, that were supporting the product. And so those were being experienced as a service that was part of this tool. So we wanted to ask, how well does the service support the effective use of the product? So, for example, if you're rolling out a new solution, you might say, how well did the rollout go? What was your experience of the service that we delivered? How do you experience the service that we provide through training and knowledge resources? How well do you, how do you feel the service of support, help desk support went, et cetera? And then ultimately, what you want to measure is the tool or the system as a business accelerator, what is sometimes called a business accelerator, or what were you able to do better or differently, and what kinds of outcomes did that result in? How did the product and the service lead to positive or accelerated business outcomes? So even if you're just doing it at a simple level, you really want to think about any technology tool that you roll out to a small or large group of people in terms of how will you know when it has been successful. That's the bottom line. How will we all be able to know that this has been a success and will continue to be a success over time? So that should be planned for in your roadmap efforts. Now I want to talk a little bit about project planning and direction because this is very careful. I mean, this is very important. Um, a lot of technology projects that fail do so because they lack experienced and consistent project leadership. So you should choose someone to lead the projects that are in your roadmap that has already successfully performed a similar project in a similar situation in an organization and environment. Or maybe even someone that has a failed project and learned sufficiently from that to know what it takes to be successful in a new initiative. And then empowerment is critical. You have to give the person that's leading the project and planning it the ability to hold stakeholders accountable for their participation and their engagement. You also need to plan for time management. One of the primary challenges of successful time management in nonprofit organizations is that employee time is often not budgeted or tracked for other projects or their day to day tasks, resulting in the sort of approach from the organization that all staff time is considered infinitely flexible. So, as a consequence of this, staffs are often given new responsibilities associated with tech projects without taking anything off of their plates that would give them that time available to commit to the effort. So this results in many projects underperforming or failing outright, as well as morale problems and increased staff turnover. The time budgeting approach, it has to get done, therefore it will get done, does not often lead to technology project success. So you want to make sure you plan for that internal level of effort, not just if you're using an implementation partner for, say, implementing Salesforce, what their time is going to cost, but also what your internal time is going to be. And, hopefully also some idea of what that costs. So people really understand the total investment that's going into executing the projects in this roadmap. So this is just an example of how you can start thinking about what a project leader is doing and what success looks like for that role. All team members that are involved in that effort have a single point of truth for the development of that tool or system, and as well as any change management associated with it. Executives and managers are given an accurate view of the project status and can get questions answered at a more detailed level. And for that individual or leader to ensure that goals and deadlines are being set for milestones and that the tasks are realistic given the scope of activity already planned for the given timeframes. We sometimes talk about when we're thinking about technology roadmaps and timelines, what are the competing initiatives that are going on in the organization at that time? So, for example, if your organization hosts a national event or a conference every May, then it's pretty likely that a large number of people inside of the organization are basically going to be MIA in regards to technology project participation, maybe from March through June, let's just say. So, that is a critical consideration. It is a competing priority. It doesn't mean that it's an adversarial competition, but it's just a reality that you have to think about. So you probably shouldn't plan to roll out a new system that broadly impacts a lot of people in May of any fiscal year. Maybe you shoot for an October calendar year. Maybe you shoot for um, an October timeframe for that implementation. And then taking it from the leader all the way down the line in terms of planning, staffing, and time commitments, you really want to spell out all of the different roles that it's going to take to make each of the projects successful. So for your project roadmap, or maybe across the projects, um, do you need a trainer? Do you need somebody to manage or coordinate support? Who is that person going to be? What are their key responsibilities? What does success look like for that role? And what is their average weekly level of effort going to be projected throughout? In this case, for this particular client example, the 2020 and 21 fiscal years. LOE here stands for level of effort. And they did this for multiple different roles. They're approaching a major Salesforce implementation or Salesforce communities implementation to over 10,000 people. So there were a lot of roles that needed to be involved, a lot of people that needed to be engaged to make that critical part of their roadmap successful. But even for smaller projects, you would want to clearly define who needs to be involved in what ways. For projects that are sort of in the assessment stage where you're trying to determine what your requirements are for future systems to be selected, you might define this in terms of who are going to be the key stakeholders and or subject matter experts that are going to be contributing input, reviewing the requirements, validating and prioritizing them, participating in all those meetings and documentation review, et cetera. Now, a lot of organizations run up against the problem of not budgeting well for change management as a function inside the execution of their technology roadmaps. As I said before, technology change always requires some sort of organizational change or behavioral change. And the practice of change management helps define the change that is coming, assesses its impact on the various roles in the organization, and helps prepare for those roles. Oops, sorry, I went the wrong way. So this is what we call our Build Consulting Change Management Framework. And it basically gives you the three main things that you need to think about when you're implementing any new system. What is the change going to be? So you need to define the change. What kind of impact is it going to have on the people that are using the system or are otherwise affected by it? And how are we going to help to prepare them for that impact? And so, again, this is a pretty simple framework. And it's just something that you can use as a mental checklist. So let's just say you're going to implement a new marketing automation platform for emailing, newsletters, maybe doing some social media monitoring, et cetera. Who's going to be affected by that? We'll start with, what are the changes going to be? What's the difference between the new tools, old tools, and the new tools? What are the processes that are going to change? What data are we collecting and analyzing through the tool? Is that going to be different? So first you want to write all those things down and be very specific about it, and then share and gain agreement across the team that you're working on the project with, that these are the changes, and don't move on until you get to that level of agreement. And then you can proceed to identify the impacts and sort of qualify or quantify what that impact is going to be. And then you want to prepare for impacts. And for us, that means you want to activate or engage leadership and align them to the initiative. We talked about the importance of executive sponsors earlier. You want to communicate about the change, and then you want to provide training and support for the change. And this is a complementary tool that we provide in the learning section of our website. It's called a change impact analysis. And it basically gives you a tool for which to use that change management framework. So you first want to identify the process areas, processes, and descriptions that are going to change, what roles within the organization that impacts, some high-level description of the impact, and then maybe a prioritization rating or set of ratings that help you decide, where we're going to focus our change management resources when we're rolling out this system. Which processes or business rules or features will require the most level of support, either because they're very important features or because they're used by a lot of people within or outside of the organization. Another thing that I like to talk about that's very important to roadmap development is the idea of a risk assessment. They're particularly necessary for large or complex technology projects that you're planning. And a good risk assessment thinks about all of the potential challenges or risks for the project, including the origination point or source for each risk, the probability of it occurring, the potential impact on different aspects of the project. And it also introduces a mitigation or response plan for each risk. Sometimes I've heard this actually described as a pre-mortem, and that you think about all of the ways that a project could die, and then you try to figure out how you would have saved the body at each different point if you were going to succeed. And that's a really gruesome way to look at it, but I have heard, and you may have heard it talked about as a pre-mortem as well. But the better name for it is a risk assessment. It basically says, how can we turn these potential obstacles in our project into successes? One example of a typical risk that we see is the lack of stakeholder availability to participate based on conflicting priorities or events. And this in somewhat harkens back to the competing priorities thing that I mentioned a few minutes ago. And depending on the degree of the lack of availability, that could have a high impact on project cost, schedule, and performance. And a good example of how to mitigate that risk would be to take steps to make sure that team members are freed from responsibilities, as I said before, that conflict with the progress on the project. This is just a quick example of a deliverable that we provided to a client. Just this idea that projects were launched without sufficient impact analysis to make sure that those risks of that impact were mitigated. And this is just a bird's eye view of a risk register. Basically, you could do this in a spreadsheet as well or in a document, but this is from a tool called Teamwork Projects. It really helps everybody be on the same page. Like, what if the vendor can't meet the agreed upon dates in this SOW? What's our contingency plan going to be for that? What if we run into resource constraints in different areas of our teams, and so on and so forth? And it gives you a way to sort of make sure that these things don't happen by planning for what can go wrong in advance. And I will just say, as a side note, that some organizations do tend to be unrealistically optimistic when they think about their chances of achieving a certain level of change. And one of the things that Build helps to bring to our clients in terms of clarity is when they're thinking about their technology roadmap, not just what do they want to do and from a technology standpoint or whether it's affordable, but also their organization has the capacity to make the change necessary to use that technology effectively. And so that's a key risk that we look for to try to mitigating up front, primarily through those change management efforts. I'm just going to go through a few more things here, and then we'll go to questions and answers. So it's studies have shown that organizations that take an open and collaborative approach, which is focused on incremental design and implementation processes, show greater potential for success. And this is most commonly referred to as an agile process. There are other terms that are given to it. And it's a style of collaboration in projects that helps to keep all of the key stakeholders engaged through the many critical decision and review approval processes throughout a technology project, from the start of requirements discovery all the way through post-implementation phases. And as I said before, when thinking about chunking out projects, it also helps break down project complexities into bite-sized chunks. So one warning is appropriate here. It is important that when a vendor is selected to help implement a new system for your organization, and that vendor uses an agile approach, that they have the ability to be flexible when working with an organization that has never successfully been through a true agile process. Because when you introduce a pure agile approach to an organization that's unused to working that way, it can be a major culture clash that sometimes results in projects getting bogged down or collapsing entirely. So for agile projects, for example, it is very important that stakeholders are frequently available to participate in design reviews and user testing, sometimes on a weekly basis. But this also means committing the necessary time on a regular basis to make business decisions within accelerated timeframes compared to what the organization is used to. So applying principles for agile in a way that will work truly for each organization is very important. So if you have a vendor that's pitching an agile approach to you, make sure you understand what they really mean by that and how they can work with your organization's custom the approach that your organization is accustomed to merge something or create a solution that works for you in terms of project process. We all understand that collaborative, iterative, agile projects styles are preferred for success. We want to make sure that it's not introduced to your organization in such a way that it's too much change at once and it doesn't result in a good outcome. So again, this was a key finding from a client that we were working with a couple of years ago. We found that staff were engaged in the process and invested in its success, and that was a good news that we delivered to them as a finding. But there was a challenge that there was a true lack of true collaboration approach on cross-departmental initiatives. So we need to get everybody working together collaboratively in an iterative fashion to try to address this problem so that the work didn't continue taking places in silos and then people pop up and butt heads periodically and then drop back down. When that's the approach in the organization, when it's not collaborative, when people aren't iteratively taking the time to work through the decisions necessary to make a good solution, um, you don't when you don't have that collaborative approach, you introduce the risk, as we noticed in the risk assessment, to the projects. So in support of tools, I just really want to think about, do you have the tools in place to guide your organization through the projects that you're going to be executing as part of your roadmap? Where can people go to get the information that they need to participate properly, get a sense of where the project's at, whatever the need might be? And studies have shown that successful projects most frequently create a digital project collaboration environment that manages and socializes critical information related to the project. So I'm essentially talking about a project slash knowledge management tool here. We prefer teamwork projects to tools like Basecamp, Asana, Microsoft Project, etc. But the key is to have a functional space that's universally adopted by all of the key project participants, and in which people can be on the same page in regards to milestones, tasks, agendas, and notes, files, risks, and key conversations, anything that's required for the project to be successful. And the best way to make sure a tool like this remains in active use with up-to-date information is to use the information in the system as a live point of reference within team meetings to drive performance reporting to stakeholders. So you want to make sure that it's not only one person that ends up using the tool, the project manager, and nobody else ever sticks their head in there. You want to make sure that it is something that's used on a regularly ongoing basis by the entire people, or at least all of the key stakeholders. This is just a visual of, a dashboard from Teamwork Projects that helps to give you an idea of where your task statuses are. And this is a more complicated Gantt chart view of a project timeline. Again, you just want to make sure that you have supportive tools available to help create these sort of organized collaborative spaces for tracking projects all the way through to fulfillment. Professional skills development, also very important. A lot of organizations don't budget for or plan for professional skills development as part of their technology roadmap. Um, Technology projects, both large and small, but particularly large and complex projects, often require team members to step into roles for which they're not fully equipped. And also, just as you change technology, people's roles change and how their roles are defined and what processes they need to follow and what data needs to collect. So it's important to give special emphasis to planning, communication, teamwork, time management, and change and adaptation skills from a professional development standpoint, but also important to make sure that people are trained and given the abilities to succeed with the features and the processes in the new system. So some new roles that might be created in the course of technology roadmap for systems implementations or replacements or enhancements of systems. You might more clearly define a system administrator role than you've had before. You might have somebody need to step into a data manager type role. You might need somebody to flex to be a trainer. You might need somebody to take on the responsibility of being the change manager for a project or projects, or even a project or technical project manager. So those are specific roles that might be assigned on a per project or a cross project basis for things that are in your roadmap. But there are also those existing roles that I mentioned. So if you're changing from Salesforce to Salesforce for development staff rather than the Razor's Edge, they need to have the professional development to be successful in that tool, Salesforce. Same thing if you go to Intact for accounting staff rather than Dynamics, Great Plains, or GP. And there's a couple of other examples on the screen here too. Microsoft Teams rather than Slack, Caseworthy rather than Sumac. You could make some correlations based on your own organization and what you're thinking about for future tools. How is that going to change the roles and responsibilities inside your organization? And it's not just going to be a thing, assumably, where you can just forklift the technology solution in and just plunk it down and see what happens. So make sure that there's support given for people that are going to move into new roles during those projects, and then over the lifespan of the systems what new processes, what new features are people going to have to absorb and learn how to use consistently. Finally, I just want to spend a couple of minutes on the idea of requirements definition from both the business requirements and sort of data and technical requirements uh, perspective. So addressing all three of those areas at once. So business and technical requirements need to be carefully documented and prioritized prior to engaging in a new system implementation, the replacement of an existing system, or any significant enhancement to a system that's already in place. Poor business requirements definition and technical requirements definition are one of the key reasons why technology projects fail to succeed. If the organization has a poor understanding of its current business processes and data, or processes are performed inconsistently, or data quality has been poorly managed, thorough business requirements can be very difficult to develop. And poor business requirements, as I said, are a problem because they lead to projects running over budget and over schedule, and also are a leading cause in the wrong system being selected and implemented. There was a better solution out there for your organization if it had a more clear perspective of its real business priorities and business requirements going into the selection project. One of the reasons why we at Build Consulting prefer to get involved with client projects during the early assessment and the roadmap phase is because when we first get involved in the implementation phase, when a product has already been selected and an implementation is just about to start or is underway, it often becomes apparent that the org will need to back up and redo some requirements definition in a more deeper, thorough manner before they can have a successful implementation. Because they're not really prepared to meet the vendor when the vendor needs them to make a well-informed and durable decision about a process, what they're going to do. And when a vendor is engaged in an implementation is already moving, it can be very difficult and costly for an organization to push the pause button. So this is just what Build has learned from its own experience, where it's best for it to enter into an engagement with a client. But it just speaks to the fact that this kind of requirements development is not often well done by organizations or even by software vendors. One of the things that Build does is it tends to take a very sort of constituent journey focused approach to business requirements, data, and technology definition. And people that are from marketing or development teams or digital engagement teams or have some brand experience are usually often familiar with this idea of audience identification or audience journey mapping, or basically how you would engage with a constituent across the journey that they walk with your organization. And that all is part of the fundamental basis that informs Build's work. So I just put a sample constituent journey mapping on here for a client and volunteer journey, where those two roles are basically walking a journey together, all the way from when a client is being identified by the organization, prospecting for, marketed to, identified, registered, they go through an intake process, et cetera, et cetera. And then once we start to get into the finer details of those journeys, we're really looking at business process mapping and analysis. What specifically goes on with each one of these phases in the journey at a detailed level? What assets or data needs to be engaged or collected at each point? And then down to the data level, what are the data objects that you need to identify that are going to play into this system, the system or systems, at least in an abstract level. So I've got an example on screen here of something that's used called crow's foot notation to help identify the data relationships between major pieces of data inside of a system. In this case, it was a loan management program for a affordable housing organization that had a loan fund. So they wanted to know how the organization record needed to be related to the contact record, how that needed to be related to the project record, how the project was related to the loan, and so on and so forth. And one of the reasons why it's good to do this is because it gives you an idea of, it gives everyone a good sense of what the major data pieces are and how they need to be connected, even if they are stored in different systems. So maybe you have some of this in a CRM system, some of it in an ERP system or accounting system, some of it in a program management system, but everybody, regardless of where the data is, has an idea of how it connects. And that can help inform your technology decisions as you develop your roadmap. So you've got these business process mapping and analysis and associated business requirements, your data relationships. Sometimes it'll be necessary to do a data inventory. And this is an example of that. So, you know, what's the initial collection point for the piece of data? What data object is it going into? Is there a defined form field and type? What are the values? So this is more at the field level and process point where the data is being collected. And again, this is not system specific. This is pre-system selection in this case for this client. So you really want to make sure that you're thinking about what's the business, data, and technical level of detail that we need in order to successfully approach our technology transformation efforts. What do we really need to know, and how do we articulate that to others that are internally and to others that are going to be partnering with us in these efforts? So a technology solutions partner like a Salesforce implementer or Blackbaud, or what have you in the accounting system space, or any system type that you can think of. And again, there's an example on the screen here. Again, this was a technology map preparatory to developing a set of technical requirements such as user experience, security, data storage, et cetera, that would span all of the different pieces of technology in their environment. So you can see that they've got Salesforce and Salesforce communities, and that integrating with a host of other things, Booking Bug, that's now called Journey, Drupal, Form Assembly, Constant Contact, MySQL as a data warehouse, and so on and so forth. So again, how are you thinking about gathering and organizing and reflecting the information that you'll need in order to be successful in your technology roadmaps, and really planning for the level of effort and time that it's going to take to go through that, and also whether your organization has the capacity to self-perform those tasks internally, or whether you'll need some sort of a vendor such as Build Consulting or another party to help you out with that. I'm going to skip past some of these other examples here. So I just wanted to put the build information strategy framework back on screen here, and so we can have it in front of us, and say that for many organizations, their obstacle to having a successful technology roadmap is not just identifying the pieces of technology that they want to replace, or even what they're going to replace them with, or how they're going to enhance them, or what features are desired. The challenges that sort of undercut these projects are largely cultural, and they are about those leadership and governance pieces, operational capacity, business process, and data modeling, and then the technology. Yes, there are technology problems to be addressed, but as one study reported, 49% of executives said the problem was related to the people organization, when there were technology problems, while 32% blamed processes, and only 19% put the finger on the technology as being the problem. And I think it's important to recognize that while technology roadmaps are about technology, they're also about so much else. All of these other things need to be considered carefully in order for your organization to be truly successful with technology at a high level. And to some extent, all of them need to be reflected in your technology roadmap. So that's the totality of the presentation content for today. If you'd like to continue the conversation with me, you can reach out to me via email, or by connecting with me through LinkedIn, and you can also fill out the contact form or find our phone number on the buildconsulting.com website. So thank you for taking the time to join the presentation today. And now I'll see if there are any questions that you'd like to add here. So somebody has submitted the question, a good bit of your recommendations are based on change management for existing orgs with existing tech. How would you adapt your advice for a new or fledgling organization with limited to no legacy technology and a leadership or stakeholder group that is just being defined? Well, I think that's a great opportunity to get things right from the start, okay? And also, even though it's a new organization and a new set of stakeholders, et cetera, it's also true that everybody's going to bring to the table their own experiences from wherever they were prior. And those might be systems that they've used and preferred, or systems that they have used and not preferred, and different kinds of experiences that they've had that inform their view. And those views will all need to be surfaced. And so it's just because it's a new organization or newish doesn't mean that there's going to be change, because all those people came from a different environment. Now, it does help to create some sense of initiative and camaraderie, that everybody's in the same boat. So for example, I had a client not too long ago that was in this category, and they had one person that was at a high level in this new organization that said, we had Salesforce in our last organization. I hated it. It's never Salesforce as far as I'm concerned. And then there was another person that said, I had Salesforce at our organization. We used it for this purpose and we really loved it. So, there's going to be some things like that that need to be worked through. And, there's change management involved in that. So you can still think about change management. You would just need to set your baseline differently, not in terms of what we've already used at this specific organization before, but still how our past experiences inform what we need to do in the future. Thanks for that question, Lori. Really appreciate it. Somebody asks, will we receive a copy of the presentation? I don't usually make the slides available, but like I said, it'll be available in video on YouTube and on our website, and in an MP3 format for audio listening after. We'll make that available in the next couple of days, and we'll send out an email to everybody that registered for the webinar. Thanks, Christina. Any other questions from the audience for today? Great. Well, I hope that you've all had some benefit from this presentation. And again, I want to thank you for joining. If you have any questions, again, feel free to follow up. I'll just put my information back up on the screen here. And there are two resources that are freely available on the Build Consulting website that you might want to look at if you have questions in regards to this. One is our blog, where we write a lot about all of the different subjects that we've covered in today's conversation. And also the learning section of our website is where our recorded webinars from the past are available on this and related topics, as well as a variety of other tools and templates and diagnostic quizzes that you can take to help either with your professional development in general, or to help inform your roadmap, what goes into it, or to help align the leadership or other stakeholders around what it takes to really put a good comprehensive roadmap together and make sure that it leads your organization to better mission outcomes. So thanks again, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.